Out of all of the known substances, water is by far the most cryptic element and natural force. So today I'm going to be explaining the different alchemical meanings behind water and its connection to ether, as well as its connection to mercury. The fluidity and the fluid motion that water takes on is no mere accident. It's actually an expression of water's higher nature. Water in its most mystical and esoteric form is known as the PRIMA MATERIA. In alchemy, this is the prime substance that is being transmuted. So the PRIMA MATERIA, which is the prime matter, is the prime material that the alchemist is using from the beginning of the great work along the transmutation process in order to turn into the end result of the philosopher's stone, or what's known as gold. And so the prime materia is also known as the beginning and the end, because what's being transmuted this entire process through the alchemical work is the prime matter. Just at the end of the result, it's still the prime matter. It's just the prime matter in its highest or exalted form. And because of that, it has so many different names, and the prime material has been known by every single type of symbolism and name, and then nicknames or code names for it that you could possibly imagine. So I'm going to name a few. Its most telling name is fire water. It's also known as mercury. It's known as quicksilver. It's known as the alpha and the omega for being the beginning and the end product. The living water, spirit, chaos, dragonfire. The list goes on and on. So the prima materia is enormously important, not just to alchemy, but also to the metaphysical terrain of our entire universe. So knowing that the prima materia is essentially the higher nature of water, we can know that water's fluidity is expressing a lot about not just the nature of water, but the nature of what water is corresponding to, which is the prime substance of this reality. We can see the fluidity, the fluid nature of water, even in how it traverses the different states of density, from being in a solid state to a liquid state to a gaseous state. So water encompasses all of the different phases of matter. Now, depending on what phase water is currently occupying, will determine what water is being referred to in that phase. So water has different esoteric meanings to it. The alchemical property of water is the prime material, but the other properties of water that water also encompasses has to do with whether it's in a solid state, whether it's in the liquid state, or whether it's in its gaseous state or its vaporized state. Because in its vapored state, water is known as the essence that comprises the soul. And in its liquid form, water is in its prime, literally, because its fluid motion is its true nature. So when water is in its most natural and intrinsic state of being in the state of liquid, it's fluid. And how that corresponds to its metaphysical properties is water then serves as the subconscious, which is why water is so correlated with emotions and the subconscious processes. Because water in this form as an intermediary between the unconscious, or the soul, and the conscious mind, or the solid, the particle state, is water serves as what's known in alchemy as spirit. But its fluid motion is showing that its nature can move and can communicate important messages and information from the astral or celestial realm to the physical and terrain realm. And that's going through the subconscious, which would look like the unconscious now having a messenger, an intermediary, to communicate and relay information to the conscious mind. So you see, water in its natural form is the fluid motion that can go in between worlds. It can embark and deliver important messages in between the different realms that could not otherwise be able to correspond and communicate with one another. Which is why another word for water in this state of liquid is known as quicksilver, or even better known than quicksilver, it's known as mercury. And this is where mercury gets its property of being the most important form in planet to communicate. It's communicating, which is what you would need to have water be able to do at its best when it's in its most inherent and intrinsic form. For this very same reason, it is no accident that we have certain archetypes emerge from the fluidity of this subconscious state in the form of what we most well known and regard as Hermes. And that is why Hermes, the father of alchemy, is known for being a psychopomp. He's relaying informations from one realm to another. And that's what the subconscious does. And it's done through the fluid motion of being able to traverse all realms, which is also the most exalted expression of the trickster archetype. Now, the trickster archetype has so much knowledge around this regarding its negative attributes and none regarding its positive qualities. So if you would like to learn the full depths and range of this trickster archetype, let me know in the comments and I will make a video explaining the trickster archetype in all of its depths and all of its negative and positive glory. So water is pretty malleable. And that's shown through the physical motion that it takes on as being a fluid. This is very important to know because as we're relating to water in its highest alchemical form as being the prima materia, the prima materia is what all of this cosmos came from. It's also known as the prime substance. It's this chaotic, primordial activity or substance that divides itself to create. And then from there, it continues to further divide itself and then once more divide itself in order to continue its creative process. So the prima materia is best known in both its spiritual and elemental form as Mercury. And Mercury's earthly form is water. All three of these belonging to the same trinity. This is why in alchemy, Mercury was known as the mother of the stone, because it is the medium of worlds, the messenger of the gods, the moist and the dry, depending on what state it is in, life and death, the breath of the cosmos. In alchemical terminology, Mercury manifests itself as the spirit and the mind. It was even considered its own counterpart. So what we can look at from an esoteric viewpoint as this metaphysical expression of water is this division that's happening out of the prime substance that it is, out of this original oneness. And from this original oneness, or this primordial substance, it takes on still a wave motion, only this time its wave motion is not in its fluid physical form that we know it in the earthly terrain as water. It takes on the wave motion of the electromagnetic field and as wave forms, the energy that material form is comprised of and is created from. So you have water as the prime material that the cosmos are made from, and then below that, it divides itself once more, again, as water, this time being the wave motion that we know as the quantum field, and that we know as the activity of the wave form state. And that's when anything that's in its solid form is collapsed into its metaphysical form. It turns into the wave form. So water is the waveform state as well as the all. And then on top of that, we know this waveform activity is coming from where? The ether. So ether is water's higher corresponding element. And the ether is most well known as being one, undetectable by any type of calibrations that we have, even if they are unsophisticated technology from the past that we thought we could detect it from and not detect it from. We can't. We don't have things that are sensitive enough to be able to detect ether. But ether is the fifth element, otherwise known as the quintessence. And this fifth element comprises all of the other elements within itself. And this is where water gets super interesting, because remember how I said that water continues to divide itself to create, and divide itself once more to create. So you're having the higher expression of water, which is known as ether. And ether is made up of all of the elements. And one of the elements that ether is made up of, if it's made up of all the elements, is water. So that is a demonstration of showing how water divides itself further and further into other components. Because water has a higher nature, it has a middle nature, and it has a lower nature, and so forth. Water has corresponding features to every level of reality. So now we know that water, as we understand it here in its earthly form, is corresponding to its higher nature, which is ether. Ether divides itself into the electromagnetic field. And what do you have that's a part of the electromagnetic field? You have the electricity and the magnetism, the masculine and the feminine energies. So ether divides itself into the electromagnetic field and into a waveform state. And from there, it continues to divide itself until you have the realm we're in now, which is physical and made up of different particles and properties. And they're all coming from the higher nature, which is ether in different forms. But its primary connection, its primary correspondence is with the element here that we know as water. So by the time that water takes on the terrestrial form that we know it as the liquid that we drink and bathe in and whatnot, it is representing the metaphysical components of all that is entirely cryptic and everything that has creation within it. And that is why water is known as the universal solvent, because water can dissolve pretty much anything, and what water cannot dissolve is why our reality is set up the way it is. It's by intentional design, specifically because water cannot dissolve it. So not just the barrier of our skin, but even our buildings, everything, even pavement, all of it is set up so that we're using substances that cannot be dissolved by water. That's how potent and universal of a solvent water is. But even water, being the universal solvent that it is no mere accident. Water dissolves all because water contains all. And due to the law of like attracts like, all gets neutralized in water through a chemical process. Now, I can't go into the mechanics of it because I can't make ions sexy. But just trust me, there are positive and negative charged chemical compounds in water that then go around attracting and repelling things into a neutral state. And that neutral state is why water is known in religion and in spirituality as being the purifying force. It's dissolving impurities through this neutralization process that's going on. And that creates what we know in our psyche or in the spiritual community as purification. And so that's why also water is used to baptize. This is also why water can be imprinted on by using the vibration of our voice to shape water, or by using our mental impressions in order to send to water. It's not just because water's fluidity will allow it to take on the shape of whatever we intend for it. It's because water contains all of the information, all of the stardust, all of the elements, all of the molecules that one could fathom within its own structure. And so when we are impressing upon it, what we are actually doing is recording our own intention onto it, but why it's such a good recorder, why it stores memory within it, and why it's known in this new age, in the spirit of this age, as storing memory within it, is because water has all of the information of the cosmos inside it. So what we're actually doing is activating water. We're calling forth, we're activating the part of the all, the information that is contained in the all that we are trying to correspond with. And so we are also imprinting our intentions onto water, but what it's really doing is summoning. It's activating within all of the information, the parts within it that are corresponding, that are a match to what we want to impress upon the water. So you have it being able to take on the fluid motion of whatever we intend for it. And then you have the additional component to that, which is that really water's just provoking itself, it's just activating within itself that which is what we are calling forth. In this respect, we can see that water not only functions as the emotional activity stored within our subconscious realm, but it also is the activity in the unconscious realm as well. So it acts as the unconscious and the subconscious. It's just in different states, as I said earlier. It's in its quicksilver form, or its mercury, when it's in the subconscious realm. And when water is operating in the unconscious realm, it's what we call the PRIMA MATERIA. Now, here's where things get really interesting when it comes to water, when water's corresponding to the ether, or what I'm calling now as the unconscious. So the ether contains all the elements, the unconscious contains all the elements. Now in my video, The Superconscious Mind, I talk about how ether is expressed as plasma, and plasma is a gas. This is very important to know when we're talking about water and how water ties into all of this, because remember how I said that water is also in its gaseous state, and when it's in its gaseous state, it's the essence that is comprising the soul. So when it's known in its vapors, we look at it as essence. And this essence in physics, we can look at as gas. So let me break this down. When water is in its gas state, or its vaporized state, it's the ether that is expressed as plasma, because plasma is a gas. But then we go one layer in, and water is being expressed as the subconscious, which is also known as the electromagnetic field, or the waveform state. And in this state, water is expressed as the subconscious, but also emotions, because emotions are energy in motion. And then water, in its solidified state, is known as humans, which is why water is the alpha and the omega, or if you prefer, the omega and the alpha. Water contains it all, and its expression is in any form given depending on the realm that water is operating within. Not only does water take on the role in different worlds that it's occupying, but also water has different meanings to that term because of how revered it is and because of how fluid its nature is. So when we hear the living waters, or drinking from these waters, versus other waters being poisonous and even leading to more thirst, what it's actually being referred to is not the literal sense of the term water. It's speaking of one of water's most revered natures, which is it containing wisdom. So water is also known as being referred to as knowledge and being referred to as wisdom when we hear waters, or living waters, or the life waters in any type of ancient tone or ancient text. Water is also taking on that extra role of being referred to as true knowledge, true wisdom that will actually lead into consciousness and into ascended states of consciousness, versus other waters, meaning other knowledge, that will lead a person away from consciousness and away from true gnosis. To further amplify the nature of water, remember how I said earlier about how water divides itself into polarities in order to create further and further down into the physical realm? Well, this is referred to in ancient texts when we hear things like waters were separated from waters, or the waters of this realm were different from the waters of other realms. It's because what was actually being said was, if water is this primordial substance, this prime material that is being used to create, then what was actually happening was we have waters of a higher nature, and waters that were separated into a lower nature, which is what's referring to astral light. So you have the astral realm being divided into the lower astral realm and into the higher astral realm. And then you have the terrestrial world being divided into the heavenly realms and into the earthly realms. And then you have this even divided from the firmament and the firmament. So there's this constant division of waters that's being used in order to create this universe. Water's true nature is the emptiness that is vibrating so fast that it is perceived as not vibrating at all, as still. The chaos that contains both spirit and matter. It is both darkness and light. Waters were what the astral realms were called, and consciousness, also known as the deep waters, pulls from its own waters to create the astral waters, and it is this medium that we carry out our lives in. Currents don't only apply to the ocean or even electrical currents. They are the intelligence, the energy and motion of consciousness itself. Currents are fundamental to the nature of reality. They are the activity of consciousness, which manifests itself as light. And so light can be regarded as the electrical emissions or currents of thought. All of this emanating from the eternal waters of the PRIMA Materia. The most esoteric meaning of water is light, because you have light dividing itself into light in order to create. And light travels on the ether in waveforms. So light travels, we already know, as a waveform, and the ether is what it's traveling, it's its backdrop that light is traveling upon or giving the illusion of traveling upon. So the ether and both light consist of waveforms. The lower nature of that we know is water. The higher nature of that is the waveform state that creates. And what's it creating upon? It's creating upon a wholeness, right? This chaotic prime material that's whole. So it's pulling from its own wholeness to create. And that creative process of pulling is the waveform state, but it's also known as vibrations. So you have waveforms or light. And what are they doing? They're vibrating. What's vibration? It's emitting waveforms. And what vibration is doing is going one way and then counterbalancing that one area that it moved from, opposite and equal way, in order to create a waveform. So you have a wholeness. And in order to create anything from this wholeness, you need movement. You need vibration, which is why we know that vibration is what creates. Sound is what creates our reality. So when you have vibration, what's actually happening is there's movement away from wholeness, and then a counterbalancing movement away from wholeness, and then another counterbalancing movement, and another counterbalancing movement, and another. And that's vibration is the waveform state we are creating through vibration, which is a counterbalancing act that consciousness is taking on in order for consciousness to create. And all of this is set under the backdrop of this alien and cryptic and mysterious substance known as water. I hope this has blown your damn mind. Make sure to subscribe to my channel for higher dimensional guidance through spiritual awakenings. See you next time.